The White House and other economists last spring and fall were talking about inflation being transitory. And I think at least the expectation when you were talking about it last spring was that it was going to be well taken care of by now. Did you get wrong? What did economists writ large get wrong? Why should Americans be confident when you say prices are going to get better later this year?
I think we've seen a number of unanticipated outcomes. When it comes to prices, what we have said consistently, focused consistently, is that this is a global phenomenon. Nomenclature aside, we find ourselves in a position now where we're looking forward, and most forecasters are projecting that the price increases will moderate.
The supply chain, then, essentially, that is the reason for the incorrect forecast 10 months ago?
Look, I think that our focus now is on assessing where we are and trying to address the issues in front of us in an effort to try to accelerate the course of the recovery. And so we find ourselves in a uniquely strong economic position on a number of counts, and we've got price increases that we need to tackle, and that's our focus.
Despite the figure that you mentioned, that month to month the prices have gone down, my colleagues are reporting about how people are finding shortages on the shelves, how the stuff that is there is more expensive. Is there anything you can do to help families pay for that food?
We saw hunger in the United States decline in 2021. Child poverty fall by 35 to 40% in America over the course of 2021. Why the core economic logic behind the president's, behind the Build Back Better plan is important in this context.
And short of that passing, and separate from what you have already done, the measures you mentioned, is there anything new you can do to help the food situation?
Well, I would say first, what we have done is historic and has made a big difference. Number two, our central economic legislative priority is getting those elements of Build Back Better in place, and part of the urgency of that is to address precisely the challenges that you are identifying.
Mm-hmm. So about 3 weeks ago, you and I had an exchange in this room in which I
that made it sound nefarious. I don't remember it that way.
Nefarious, but I posited a bunch of questions that you couldn't answer about when the tests would be available, how many Americans would be in their hands.
Sure.
It's now three and a half weeks later. Are there any answers to any of those questions yet?
Well, I would say first we've put out a number of steps that have been taken since that point in time. The pleasant and democratic exchange we had in this briefing room a few weeks ago, Mike, but including a number of contracts have been signed in the last few weeks.
Just to follow up on that, fair to say that with half of January finished and the first of the doses beginning to arrive maybe by next week, that there's no way that 500 million tests are going to be delivered and in the hands of Americans by the end of this month.
Well, that's why we said at the time that we would begin to get these tests, and they would begin to go out to the American public in January. And we're exactly on track for that.
How much longer should Americans expect that they'll be paying these inflated prices?
So what I can say is that in the context of a strong economy, most independent forecasters expect these prices to moderate over the course of 2022, and that's consistent with the administration's view.
For clarity, that means by the end of 22 it's moderated, or we're kind of back to where we were before this by those projections?
Well, if you look at the projections by independent forecasters, then you see moderation over the course of 22, and you get back to you get back to levels that are closer to pre-pandemic normal. But I think that in the short term, in the immediate term, I think we'll focus on the practical steps that we can take.
Forgive me, both you and Jen, for asking about the Fed. On December 1st, you said that the president would be making choices in the coming days on the 1st. And you said that part of the reason to make those picks was so people could, quote, face squarely head on the economic challenges that we face, the governors can. So at the time, we're talking about imminent picks that would help the central bank, who the president is now banking on to help fight inflation, see around corners and address crises. 6 weeks later, we don't have picks. So I guess my question is, what's the holdup? What changed? And do you think that 6-week delay is having an impact? I mean, you're relying on the Fed to be able to help curb inflation, and they don't have a full bench.
So in your last question, no, I don't think it's having an impact. I think that the most immediate issue on that score is that the president's two nominees to be the chair and the vice chair of the Fed are now up in front of the Senate. One had his.
Businesses are starting to expect inflation is here to stay and will act accordingly, especially as many workers aren't feeling any increase in wages due to the increase in prices.
For typical people who are working and thinking about their household budgets, for many of them, they've never seen a labor market that offers as many job opportunities as they have right now. For people in the bottom 40% of the income distribution, wage increases are up at historic levels, which creates new opportunities. For those typical folks sitting around the kitchen table thinking about this coming year, the largest single costs that families face are healthcare, childcare, the cost of a home, and we have concrete, practical, straightforward ways to deliver relief on those costs and to do so in a way that wouldn't add to aggregate demand, wouldn't create an inflation concern, would be fully paid for across time.
Brian talked a lot about needing to address snares in the supply chain, but you all have taken quite a few of those steps, and we're still seeing high inflation, shortages on shelves. So is this an issue that shows the sort of limitations of the presidency and the executive branch? Is this an issue that the president simply can't solve?
I think what it shows, and you heard Brian talk about this a bit, is that it's a multi-pronged challenge.
But if it doesn't pass next week, what does that say about his presidency and his political clout? And what would you say to Democratic base voters who have seen, potentially not just one legislative failure with Build Back Better, which has been shelved, but potentially a second legislative failure in a month? How do you convince Democratic voters to vote for you?
What I think we would say to any American, whether they're Democratic-based voters or not, is that the majority of the American public elected the president to do hard things and to fight for hard things.
Situation on inflation. Just noticed in the inflation statement from the White House this morning, there was no reference to Build Back Better. There was a reference to the American Rescue Plan. Just wondering if that reflects anything about the view of the White House on the prospects for Build Back Better or the role it could play in the situation on inflation.
No, I would say that your colleagues here who are frequent this briefing room have heard us say more times than they can probably count the role of a number of economists in advocating for Build Back Better passing because of the impact it would have on lowering costs and addressing inflation.
Senator Romney today basically said, I'll use the exact quote, that the speech yesterday that the president gave was, quote, going down the same tragic road taken by President Trump and casting the doubt on the reliability of American elections. Does the White House have a response to that?
I know there has been a lot of claim of the offensive nature of the speech yesterday, which is hilarious on many levels, given how many people sat silently over the last 4 years for the former president.
Response to Mitch McConnell today, who had some strong words for the president, called his speech a rant, incoherent, profoundly unpresidential, but he also accused the president of shouting that 52 senators and millions of Americans are racist unless he gets whatever he wants.
To the president, what is more irresponsible, unbecoming, and divisive is the coordinated effort by far too many Republicans across the country to perpetuate the big lie and make